destroying our objects, right? Taking them out of memory. So some of the more advanced things we'll talk about in the future, but just want to point that out. This is how you get events going for the controls on our form. Alright, so that's pretty much it for our demo here as far as building a simple user interface here and using the layout toolbar, getting familiar with how to place controls on the form, position, that sort of thing. I just want to mention again, we are going to take this application here, this simple form here, and we're going to expand and evolve this into a full-fledged application that monitors the SQL servers on our network. So it's going to be a full-fledged monitoring, data entry, and data manipulation application when we're done. It's going to be pretty cool. One other thing I want to mention, though, since we're kind of on the topic of designing user interfaces here, is go back to our whiteboard and talk about some user interface design guidelines. These are all pretty simple and straightforward, but I kind of want to reinforce them because a little bit goes a long ways when it comes to designing user interfaces. Number one, keep it simple, right? Pretty straightforward. Design for easy to understand program flow. And also use container controls to group and organize your related controls. So if we flip back to our interface, and again, this is a really simple little form as an example here, but the same applies to big complex forms. Number one, program flow. Program flow is very important. Usually, go from top to bottom with your tab order and such as, and same with it. And what I mean by tab order here is when a user that doesn't like to use their mouse likes to tab around using their tab key, right? So we'd have our tab order set first up here and then flow down through all these controls so they can just tab through the controls. And we're going to talk about that in our usability video. We'll talk plenty on that, but how your program kind of flows through as far as the user is concerned, and just by looking at it. You can tell just by looking at this that we have our summary information up here again, details down here, grouped together. You can see here's our group box control to group our details control, and then our buttons down here for our commands. And we'll probably have more buttons down here too. We'll have a new button, maybe a save button, maybe a cancel and a close. But you can just kind of look visually that we have our commands down here, our master up here, and our detail in the middle. So it's kind of important just to keep things simple and design for easy to understand program flow and such. Also, making it easy on the user. Again, this kind of plays into the above here, but provide default values. That's a big one that'll save the user time, give them a head start on what they're doing, and users are always appreciate saving them time. And having the new button is a perfect example of that. If I click on new, I should preload anything that I can, right? Especially when it comes to checkboxes. Choose the obvious choice for your defaults. Anything else, text data can be tough sometimes, especially if you're going to require information from the user. But some things are certainly, viable. If you know what country your application is deployed to, you could always default the country field to their country, things of that nature, right? So keep it simple on the user. Also be mindful of control positioning, and we learned all about control positioning here. Control positioning makes a big difference because it just makes it easy to work with your application. You don't have to think about what you're doing. You just kind of know, right? Another thing here, stay consistent. Each form should maintain a similar look and feel. Obviously here we don't want two forms within the same application that look completely different because that'll confuse the user. And another thing here with the visual scheme kind of plays into the same thing here. Decide on a visual scheme ahead of time, and that could be your fonts, your colors, your font sizes, and your control types, right? And by control types, what I mean there is, use the control that your data is going to fit into. For instance here, if you have a date or a time that you're going to fill in, don't use a text box to do it. Use what's called the date time picker control, because this will automatically give them a calendar for the control so they can choose the date rather than type it in, or choose the time rather than type it in. Right? So that's a lot easier than managing time and dates inside of a text control. So do that properly. Use controls based on the type of data that is going into them. Also make sure it's aesthetically comfortable for the users. Of course, they're going to be more inclined to work with an inviting application rather than one that would scare them away. So again, all these things are pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but definitely a little bit, again, goes a long way when it comes to designing user interfaces. Alright, so in this CBT Nugget, we took a look at configuring controls. And the whole basis for this video was really just to give you a foundation for what controls are. And we saw that every control, every visual control that we work with contains properties, methods, and events. And we're going to take a much more detailed look at specific properties, methods, and events here as we work with these controls individually over the next couple of videos. So that was the goal here. And then we got familiar by jumping into the integrated development environment here, Visual Studio, and got familiar with how to construct a user interface from scratch. And more importantly here, got familiar with the layout toolbar and how we can save some time in positioning those controls, because again, lining everything up, positioning controls is important because it gives structure and makes your application look a lot more organized. So once we got through that here, I just got you through the basics of getting the signatures, or really the events, the structure of the event for each control down into the code window, so we can start writing code for those events, which again we'll start doing in the next couple of videos. And at the end here, just wanted to get you familiar with some basic design guidelines when it comes to user interfaces. Again, because the user interface, the window to your application, very important. So it's good to get the skills ahead of time to start thinking about how you would construct a user interface and how you would design a user interface. If a project came to you and you had to build an application around a bunch of data, how would you do so? So it's good to start thinking about this stuff ahead of time because, again, the user interface is very important. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.